Plan. The United States federal government should establish national health insurance via accountable care organization via block grants in support of accountable care organizations. Advantage 1, disease. ACAs improve population health by getting rid of disjointed fee-for-service payment models and recentering incentives around population health goals. Becca said out 16. The ACA model allows the opportunity to create a transformative payment model towards a prospective value-based reimbursement system holding providers operating through one or more ACAs accountable for population health outcomes. Reform methods are provider-led and participation in the ACO's voluntary decisions remain in the hands of providers and patients. The model aligns financial incentives with population health goals. The all-payer agreement does not restrict access to providers. Under the all-payer agreement, Medicare beneficiaries distributed to an ACO will enjoy enhanced coverage. By relying on prospective value-based payment, the model aligns providers' financial incentives with goals of eliminating costly waste in the system stemming from overtreatment. The ACO-based delivery model creates a promising environment for a healthcare system to more fully embrace initiatives. A focus on these metrics will reward high-quality care and direct healthcare resources towards population health. Under the current fee-for-service system, there is no incentive to ensure that these important outcomes are achieved. The agreement provides Vermont with federal resources and federal subsidies key for ACO success. Picket 9. If and when Congress actually manages to pass a bill, the real action will be in the states which will have a surprising degree of autonomy in determining how they implement federal legislation, since we get the money from federal subsidies that are available. And ACS fundamentally changes who assumes for risk for population health from providers to hospitals, shifting incentives and stopping the overuse of care. Brennan and Lee 11. Providers' interest in ACA grows, the movement may be accelerated even more by the federal government's efforts. The CMS has developed a flexible model. The ACA model is critical to controlling cost. ACAs are the fundamental vehicle in the move away from fee-for-service medicine and incentives for the overuse of care. The more sophisticated potential ACAs might also realize that they could grow the margin by eliminating unnecessary care and capitalization. Insurers might be willing to turn some of their cost-cutting measures over to providers. ACA development could also be accelerated by movement from employer-based insurance to the exchange segment. A state insurance commission-based exchange might conclude that the only solution is to move rapidly out of fee-for-service into a prepaid approach. Hospitals and doctors are looking seriously at taking responsibility for population health. The current segment structure of American healthcare is under a great deal of pressure. The incentives of fee-for-service have finally broken the federal bank, and the limits of employers' ability to pay will mean that cross-subsidies cannot save the day. Changes in insurance will move us towards the accountable care organization concept, and our current business models could melt that quickly. And fee-for-service reimbursement erodes doctor-patient communication and trust because it avoids the overlap between doctor and patient interests. Restructuring incentives is key to avoid adversarial relationships and improve communication. Golden Lipkin 99. Fee-for-service reimbursement create financial incentives to practice medicine in certain ways whose doctor is in any way expressed as one of the most critical problems inherent in managed care for the doctor-patient relationship. Patients correctly wonder if doctors are caring for them, their plan, or their own job, the income. The latter is problematic. Fee-for-service ambiguity erodes has permissive adversarial relationships and inhibits patient-centered care. Plans could promote patient-centered care by trying to maximize the extent to which patient-doctor and plan interests overlap, promoting continuity, communication, and prevention can further all three interests. Integrated system introduce opportunities for improvement in the continuity across the spectrum of care. Opportunities arise for coordinating care so that individuals don't fall through the cracks. And defensive medicine practices necessarily increase the risk of an outbreak of antibiotic-resistant pathogens. Masada 14. Defensive medicine is an emerging problem. The manifestation of very common defensive medicine is certainly the excessive prescription of antibiotics that induce antibiotic-resistant cases. The emergence of pathogens resistant to multiple antibiotics reduces the possibility of an effective treatment. The emergence of resistance to antibiotics is currently faster than the development of new molecules. This phenomenon often involves health facilities. Antibiotics are often prescribed by doctors in excess of amount, and even if it is not necessary to do because of complaints that doctors often find themselves forced to face applying the well-known practice of defensive medicine. The defensive medicine is inspired on minimizing the risk of judicial school. The objective of the protection of the health of the patient will be minimization to the secondary to the minimization of legal risks. And extinction, Davies 08. Antibiotic-resistant pathogens have been recognized as one of the main threats to human survival. Effective and appropriate use of existing antibiotics are imperative. How health services respond in the coming years will determine the future of treating vector diseases. This challenge is not to be underestimated. Microbes are formidable adversaries and continue to exact a toll on the human race. And advantage to health disparities. This plan implements effective care strategies by aligning with provider incentives, leading to accountable care communities that are sustainable and well integrated. Janonsky 13. Distributed fee-for-service approaches have disincentivized coordinating care. ACAs focus on improving overall health of and offer strong incentives for providers to deliver the most effective care strategies possible, maximize effectiveness, take an inclusive approach to include community-based prevention. Investing in prevention offers stronger potential for returns and cost savings as measures. Prevention can now help providers reach their goals of healthier communities and lower healthcare costs. Integrating prevention and public health with the larger healthcare system can be implemented, including through coordination with providers, employers, housing, transportation, education, and chambers of commerce to find ways to improve health while also achieving other critical goals. And healthcare is an anti-blackness superstructure where physicians are seldom aware of the biosocial forces that underlie the inherent structural disparities and violence in healthcare that make minority populations are more susceptible to diseases. Improvements in community-based care are key to spread awareness. Pharma et al. 06. Large-scale social forces, racism, gender inequality, poverty, political violence, and war, and sometimes the very policies that address them often determine who feels ill and who has access to care. This awareness is seldom translated into formal frameworks that link social analysis to everyday clinical practice. Biosocial understandings of medical phenomena are urgently needed. Clinicians are not trained to understand such social forces. The good news is that such biosocial understandings are far more actionable than is widely recognized. It is possible to use the tools in a manner informed by an understanding of structural violence and its impact on disease distribution and on every step of the process leading from diagnosis to effective care. Susceptibility to infection and poor outcomes is aggravated by social factors such as poverty, gender inequality, and racism. Unsurprisingly, in less than a decade, AIDS has become a disease that disproportionately affected Americans poor, many of whom are engaged in risk behaviors at a far lower rate than others who are not at heightened risk of infection with sexually transmitted diseases. Structural violence have a profound influence on effective diagnosis, staging, and treatment of the disease and its associated pathologies. Each of these determinants of disease cause and outcome is itself shaped by the very social forces that determine variable risk of infection. Clinicians in Baltimore reported how racism and poverty forms of structural violence were embodied as excess mortality among African Americans without insurance. And structural disparities in healthcare only strengthen xenophobic views of minority populations such as Latinos in terms of otherness. Addressing the disparities could change the way vulnerable populations are viewed and begin to dismantle structural violence. Caseda et al. 11. Anthropological approaches to health through the lens of structural forces can document highly localized practices and provide a comparative perspective on how specific policy and institutional processes affect individual health experience and larger disease patterns. Structural vulnerability is not unique to Latin Americans in the U.S. It applies to the poor, the medically uninsured, the sexually stigmatized, people of color, the disabled, the incarcerated, and those with drug and alcohol problems. Xenophobia is disguised as a concern with national security. Citizenship status determines access to social and healthcare services. The dynamics of social exclusion and the limits placed upon citizenship play out in the clinics in the forms of economic scarcity, food insecurity, and hunger, exclusion from care, and restrictions on professional autonomy of health providers. Denial of care and treatment to some threatens the general health and well-being of all. This threat to the well-being of the public does not derive from the fact that migrants have potential disease vectors, but from the structural reality that there is a whole sector of the population is being adversely incorporated. And the structural violence constitutes an ongoing, accelerating, and likely invisible genocide of the oppressed and anti-blackness superstructure. Hinton 7. Violence is not okay. Injustice causes structural violence to health, bodies, minds, damages people, and must be therefore resisted non-violently. Structural violence kills far more people than warfare. 4 million people have been killed in war. 6 million people have died in the DRC since then from disease, displacement, and hunger, bringing the total to an unthinkable 10 million. The real problem is one of priorities. Structural violence is neither natural nor inevitable. And probability before magnitude. Cognitive bias means that you will think that the impact is bigger than it really is. Diadkowski 08. Conjunctive fallacy applies to futurological forecasts according to probability theory. Adding an additional detail must render the story less probably, yet human psychology seems to follow the rule that adding an additional detail can make the story more plausible. Specific scenarios can inflate our probability estimates as well as misdirecting investments into implausibly detailed risk scenarios. People tend to overestimate conjunctive probabilities and underestimate disjunctive probabilities. People overestimate the probability that 7 events of 90% of probability will all occur. People underestimate the probability that 1 of 7 events of 10% probability will occur. And structural violence outweighs social bias, underrepresents its exponential effects. Nixon 11. Recipients were triply discounted as political agents. Long-term causalities of slow violence and discounted as cultures possessing concerns of their own. We need to urgently rethink politically, imaginatively, and theoretically slow violence. Violence is customarily conceived as an event that is immediate in time, explosive in space. We need to engage in a different kind of violence, a violence that is neither spectacular nor instantaneous, but rather incremental and accretive. Its calamitous repercussions playing out across a range of temporal scales. We also need to engage the representational narrative and strategic challenges posed by the relative invisibility of slow violence. Different kinds of disaster pose an unequal health. And oneness only exists because of our refusal to confront it. The 1AC repositioned its discussions of healthcare so that policies can foster actual social change. Green 03. Oneness works because oneness can remain a largely unmarked and invisible category to white people. The silence around the subject position troubling by telling more explicit stories around recent class it's possible to open a door for more complex theorizing about the relationship between those who serve and those who are served. And we cannot create a different kind of space for discussions about social change that will service that ideally creates telling the difficult story who has a willingness to break our silences around race, class, and service. I'm ready for cross-ex.
Okay, on your first disease advantage, are you going to defend an all-payer model?
Yes, we defend an all-payer model that shifts away from the current fee-for-service system. We have
then are you going to argue that you lower or eliminate prices for healthcare?
We're going to say that after our plan is enacted, we're going to change the fundamental way people approach healthcare. So we're going to have this reimbursement system where providers are paid not based on like the number of services they provide.
I mean, that's fine, I understand that, but for the individual, like, right now, post-plan, if I were to go to the doctor, would I have to pay less than I would if I went right now?
This relates back to the reimbursement system because
do you lower prices for people?
Yes, we lower prices in the sense that we provide better healthcare.
So in that case, your Brennan and Lee evidence that says you stop overuse, how does lowering prices stop overuse? Wouldn't people want to use more since it's not as expensive?
We stop the overuse. Our lowering prices depends on the reimbursement system. So our reimbursement system makes sure that people are paid based upon the quality of the service they provide, and by providing better quality, and this one stops the overuse of care and leads to the lowering of prices because there is better quality care and you would have to go to the doctor as often.
That's fine, but that didn't answer my question.
How did that not answer your question?
So my question, you lower prices.
Yes.
Why would people not use it more because the prices are lower? You talk a lot about how like fee-for-service is bad and this is better than fee-for-service because of reimbursements, and that's fine, that's great, I understand that part. But why would people not use more of a less expensive product?
I told you, we're not lowering the price in the sense that every time you go see the doctor, it's going to be a lower price. We're lowering prices of healthcare overall for one person over their entire lifetime, so they have to go to see the doctor less. How does that not make sense?
So do you lower prices or not? Because you just said we don't lower prices for individuals, and then said we lower prices for individuals over the course of their lifetime.
We don't lower their per visit to the hospital prices, but we do lower the prices. They go to the hospital less, so they pay less for healthcare.
Why do they go to the hospital less?
Because we focus on overall population health goals instead of wanting people to go to the doctors as many times as possible.
So people are healthier because you focus on broader goals?
Yes, basically. Because we give people the right incentives to provide better healthcare. So this once again.
But why does it matter if you provide better healthcare if no one's going to the doctor?
They don't go to the doctor because we provide better healthcare.
Okay. Well,
we should go to the doctor's first.
Line C's then. Do you mind if I use your stamp?
Yeah, you can take it.
Okay. It's going to be 5 off and then case in the order of disease and disparities.
Unless you want to float on the back of something.
Do you mind if we borrow some flow paper?
We need 2 sheets.
If you don't have any, that's fine.
2 sheets should be fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
How many more do you need?
No, we just needed 2.
Oh,
that's
I
fine.
need some.
2 is okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
wait,
no,
actually,
yeah.
never mind.
We had 8 pieces of flow paper.
I had a
Do you
friend.
need more or
No, we're good. Thank you though.
what did you order?
5 off and then case in the order of disease and then disparities.
Okay, so you run 5 off and then you ask them for their flow paper.
We only needed 2 sheets. That's not that, well,
Look, you're just like, I don't even know, man. I'm just a crappy white dude.
I'm just going to try. Alright. Did I send up John?
Give me a second.
Okay.
Hang on, she doesn't have it up there.
Cool.
Okay.
First off, interpretation. National Health Insurance is historically meant universal, comprehensive, federally financed program. Rhode Island Group Act 16. First off, the health insurance program is a government financed program. Follow the example of European nations. Key to the NHI was compulsory nature, mandatory payments, ensuring sufficient funds. Government financed health insurance can be divided into 2 categories. National health insurance programs cover the entire population. Single federally operated health insurance program will replace all public and private sector health plans. Another single payer program will replace a single government fund to pay hospitals, physicians, other care providers. U.S. federal government refers to 3 branches of federal government. U.S. legal no date. U.S. federal government has 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Violation population. ACOs are providers, not insurers, and creating a provider network is obviously not funding payment schemes for people in the U.S. CMS 17. ACOs are a group of doctors, hospitals, and other providers who come together to give care to patients. Plan fiat's action by the 50 states to accept the agreements. If they don't, then you can just vote negative on presumption. Reason to prefer. Limits. Infinite number combination of hybrid schemes and possibly negative. National health insurance, the only mechanism limiter in the topic, so having a limited understanding of it is key. And precision. NHI and single payer use synonymously in the key topic education. And ground. Explicitly steals 3 coordinated positions. States, all payer, and ACO CPs. Being comprehensive and universal guarantees links to topic DAs like farmer recruitment and econ DA. And they should have to specify what form of value-based care they defend. They can include capitation, all payer rate setting, bundle payments, goal budgeting, independent reason to vote neg because it obfuscates debates about those funding mechanisms, prevents neg from being able to read funding picks, which is the most dynamic neg strategies on this topic. Evaluating according to competing interpretations, reasonability is arbitrary and requires intervention. Next off. 50 states, DC, and all relevant territories should establish national health insurance via accountable care organization via block grants in support of accountable care organizations, expand the individual Medicaid programs to advanced Medicaid accountable organizations, and the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Health of the Treasury should grant Section 1332 waivers to Patent Protection Affordable Care Act and Section 115 waivers to the Social Security Act pursuant to aforementioned policy, and not require waiverment reorientation. And solves the app. State waiver achieves universal coverage for funding through payroll taxes. White and Coxias 15. States may undertake a waiver to establish tax finance universal program, universal health, and employer-sponsored health plans. Discontinue mandates and penalties will be waived to finance. The state would use spending on Medicare and CHIP to impose new payroll tax. State residents are already paying the need to finance single payer through less transparent mechanisms. And Medicaid expansion enables the states to operate ACOs. Gudesser 17. State Health Center for Healthcare Strategies released a fact sheet outlining the growth of state Medicaid programs operating ACOs. There are 10 states managing Medicaid ACO programs, while additional 11 states are looking to create Medicaid programs to advance the ACA organizations. ACOs. States that are looking to expand Medicaid programs support ACOs have 2 value-based care reimbursement structures to choose from. State Medicaid programs operating ACOs will track data, patient outcomes, and costs while determining what patients need care interventions. And third off. U.S. pharmaceutical innovation goes strong now, but it's not logged in. Young 17. New drugs approved and new methods open up the surge of productive innovation successes continued. Present public valuations volatile in 2014 uncertainties and drug pricing controversies to blame. 2016 equity markets plunged and then recovered. Cause of uncertainty around pharma industry where heavy contributor moved to appeal and place Obamacare revised tax laws that could hurt. Business outlook for farmers will continue to be positive in regard to drug development. Industry trajectory in drug development innovation productivity is strong and will continue to be strong. Although there will be success in failures by individual companies, biotech companies demonstrate ability to develop new drugs. NAF crushes innovation. USP Global doesn't link to CP and turns case. Phillips and 10. If U.S. funding universal healthcare abandons global leadership in medical innovation will be selling a future short. U.S. generates lion shares global profits. Medical innovators more than half the world's sales drugs currently U.S. profits could generate and allow innovators across the world to fund expensive R&D efforts critical for bringing new medicines. The UK just 3% of world drug sales. If U.S. will start acting like a European country, innovation will lessen worldwide. U.S. faces real innovation trade-offs in creating healthcare entitlements. New tech generate far larger health benefits than increased spending. U.S. faces a choice. One is universal coverage. These commitments could become unsustainable, stifling innovation and innovation key in medical diplomacy impacts was global war. Morogan Almani 14. Scientific healthcare resources create dominant soft power, generate favorable behavior, and build partnerships and global security, healthcare sectors, research and net segment in the economy can play a pivotal role in USA's domestic response to unpredictable challenges through economic benefits of expanding countries through employment and socioeconomic factors contribute to radicalism. US can use diplomacy and medicine to reach out to countries. Healthcare cooperation represents a unique opportunity to set relations for more sustainable course and solves every scenario for escalation. Martin 17. Health diplomacy can be a mechanism for bringing nations' intention together, convene where politicians cannot. India, Pakistan, Israel, Palestine, territories of water shortages, food and water security. Global health diplomacy should be a pillar of the U.S. security agenda. Early intervention reduces costs, improves capabilities, deal with quickly global threat. Leadership through health diplomacy, a route to leveraging one assets to address common threats, to improve regional stability and global security. Next off. A single payer ends access to reproductive services. Jafari 16. High demand prohibits federal funding abortions. This is for troubling. Single payer would prohibit private sales insurance that duplicates and unlikelihood insurance companies stick around and sell abortion is slim. High demand mesh with single payer would mean no one in America would have insurance health coverage for abortion. Since a single payer is the only plan available and employers are forced to pick it, would be forced to abandon birth control coverage altogether, leaving women without contraceptive coverage. And reproductive choice gives the women power against patriarchal institutions. The act kills female autonomy. Arthur 12. Throughout patriarchal history, societies guarantee men's paternity by controlling women's reproductive capability. Restrictive norms opposed to women's right to autonomy, a right to control body own fertility. Very idea allowing women to control their own fertility gives women the true power and paternity. A woman deciding to have an abortion is the ultimate insult to male authority. And patriarchy normalizes violence and turns the case. Leads to environmental destruction, prolific war, and structural violence. Warren KD 94. And environmentally destructive behaviors, strip manufacturing, farming, pollution, or instances of behaviors maintained and sanctioned within patriarchy, presumption of warism, and the wars of natural rights is an ordinary way to impose dominion goes hand in hand with patriarchy. including these real-life consequences are precisely with those concerns: nuclear proliferation, war, environmental destruction, violence towards women, which many feminists see as logical outgrowing of patriarchal thinking. Acknowledging patriarchal conceptions that feed militarism is the first step to reducing their impact and preserving life on Earth. Patriarchal conceptual frameworks, legitimate impaired thinking is manifested through behaviors which make life on Earth more impossible. Skip the fifth off on the case. They have zero cards on why ACOs are a value-based approach to health. This is the internal link to the advantage. ACOs fail in showing the case on numeroff 11. Do not empower consumers to be stakeholders in their own care to make fully formed decisions about their coverage and care. Vague requirements of performance measurement and fail to address underlying issues driving costs taken. The patient consumer out of the equation undermines accountability given the uncertainties in distributing savings. The intent to provide a fee and service remains in place. Providers have been said to intervene as opposed to engage in thoughtful discourse and collaboration, create an unfair competitive advantage for large organizations. Single and test and vague model, less financial and clinical pressure to improve efficiency and quality. Large delivery systems are once again able to claim and consolidate their hold on substantial portions of the market, have little incentive to improve quality care. Why reward the very institutions that failed? And media's hype ACA stable. Demco 713 reports that demands of premature insurance spend 79% of premiums on medical claims. Induction of the market stabilizing, regaining profitability. According to Kaiser Family Foundation study on track have their best year. Reason for resilient customers eligible subsidies. Kaiser data tracks the Obamacare markets on a path towards viability. Exits have been offset by Sensient's decision to significantly expand Obamacare footprint. And consensus studies prove ACA expands coverage, solves every access internal. Glide 17. ACA to expand coverage and access to care. The ACA provides subsidized insurance. A number of uninsured Americans has fallen to 27 million. Studies have examined how access has improved since ACA. One found that proportion of Americans without doctor decreased 3.5%, and the proportion of reporting inability to afford care 5.5%. Among their significant improvements, 72% of those in an enrolled marketplace plan used their insurance plan have said they would not have been able to afford or access care before the ACA. Before implementation of ACA, many Americans had inadequate access. Expanded coverage of not only decreasing the number of Americans on insurance is substantially improved access. People insured through ACA are much less likely to report they were unable to get care. And no ABR extinction impact and intervening actors solved. Burger 14. Microbes are evolving to be resistant to antibiotics faster than new antibiotics are being developed. However, ABR is unlikely to represent a threat to civilizations, and humanity survived throughout antibiotics until 1940. We expect other actors to address ABR. It continues to be more pressing, and new drugs trumpet Ships Research Institute 17. Scientists give a new superpowers to antibiotics called vacuum. Advanced could eliminate the threat of antibiotic-resistant infections. We used to come doctors use this without fear of resistance emerging. Ideal place to start developing better antibiotics. Bacteria already have a hard time overcoming vacuum's original mechanism of action. And disease won't cause extinction.
Skip that. Go on to disparities.
On disparities. Increasing access doesn't solve due to issues with care delivery. Shapiro et al. 17. Low-value care among Black and Hispanic beneficiaries demonstrated to be high compared to white beneficiaries. Greater use in the healthcare system associated with significantly higher rates of low-value care among Black and Hispanic beneficiaries suggests differential care irrespective of specific minority, race, or ethnicity. Underuse of effective care among Black and Hispanic families have been attributed to obstacles in accessing healthcare system. Greater utilization may increase the receipt of low-value care, widening disparities in care quality. Greater receipt of low-value services among Black and Hispanic patients crowd out the effective care, highlight the importance of improving quality, and increased health insurance doesn't lead to better health. To Bennett 12. There's increasing evidence showing that care provides marginal clinical benefit. More care isn't always better. Two robust studies have answered this conundrum. In 87% outcomes, free care made no difference. Most recent study compared to poor people cited Medicare. No insurance found no mortality difference. Mere act of providing insurance doesn't correlate with better health. Good health is determined by choices rather than insurances. And ethical obligations ontological to only coherent rubrics that maximize lives. Green 10. Science tells us moral judgment, not rational enterprise. Exceedingly unlikely there's any coherent moral theory can accommodate moral intuition. Consequence to respect for persons, refrain treating them with all object, counting every person well-being decision-making process, give equally to everyone interest. Just a intelligent person wants wrong, person man safe others. Answer will be tautological. And magnitude outweighs probability. They suffer from bias. Bostrom 11. Cognitive bias competes after thinking clear with existential risk. Using the availability heuristic may be create a good story bias where people evaluate possibility of existential risk scares on the basis of experiences. No one has experience. Expectation may be formed on fictional evidence derived.
So we read everything except for the Indulgia card, which is the very last card on the first advantage.
And the fifth off.
And the fifth off. Yeah.
Where first?
So first question, I just want to clarify the T. It's
so the violation we have is that ACOs are providers, not insurers. That the plan creates a provider network, which is not funding payment schemes for people in the U.S.
Okay, so T not. Okay.
You're not insurance is basically the.
Okay. So on T, the status of your counterplan, it's
Conditional.
Conditional. Okay, so I want to go on a bit on the case. Firstly, we have this amazing evidence that models after the Vermont ACO, which is in 2016. So could you explain how your case turn, the numeral of 11 card, applies to our case?
Right. So what we're saying is that ACOs specifically,
But this
structurally
is from
are like
2011, and our specific model we model after is from 2016.
Well, I mean, I would say it's the burden of the affirmative to prove that like criticisms of this ACO don't also apply to you.
Okay, so this doesn't exactly apply, but let's move on to the.
Well, we didn't say that.
Let's move on to the D. Benedict 12 card. So you're saying that increase in. Never mind. Let's go on to the pharmacist. So for your pharmacist, how does it specifically link to accountable care organizations? Because
So-
your tag says single payer.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the tag doesn't say single payer. We're saying that like any new universal health service is pretty much going to be affecting the innovation market because it's going to be lowering the prices that medical innovators depend on for profits.
So
and
why are
that's
the
what drives
prices
innovation.
lowered?
Because you lower the cost of drugs.
Why do we lower the cost? Where do we say that we lower the cost of drugs?
In cross-ex, you said that over the course of their lifetime, you decrease.
I said the cost of
of healthcare, which
okay.
triggers the link.
Okay, we could get into that later. For your
Please
decide about reproductive services, how do ACOs decrease reproductive services? This one specifically says single payer.
Yeah, so that was mistagged for a different affirmative, so I apologize for that, but it still applies.
But in your card it says single payer system and it's highlighted.
Because if you look at the warrants, it's talking about the Hyde Amendment, and so anything that is funded by the federal government triggers the link to this disad because of the Hyde Amendment. So regardless of which specific mechanism is in this evidence, it still applies to any affirmative that advocates for federal funding, which means you either link to this disad or you're not topical. So I guess that's a choice you'll have to make in the 2AC.
So your link is we increase federal funding.
Not for reproductive rights.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a bit of prep. Give me a second.
Thank you.
You have this file, right? This is like gonna be
Okay.
your 1 hour along the way.
Or we have 8:45 left. So what do you think?
Oh.
I have you on 7:31.
7:31.
Yeah,
Oh, I started late. I'm so sorry. The order is going to be case, and then case in the order of disease, and then health disparities. Then we're going to go on to T, the pharma disad, the waivers counterplan, and then the single payer counterplan. Do you need me to repeat the order? Or?
yeah. If you don't mind.
It's going to be case in the order of disease, then health disparities, and then we're going on to TNHI, the pharma innovation disad, the waivers counterplan, and the single payer counterplan.
I'm confused about what you mean by
Single payer.
waivers and single payer. The second off, the counterplan was all one counterplan.
Yeah, no, I just called it the waivers counterplan, and I'm just calling it the counter. Wait, what's the fourth?
The
You
fourth
said
off
single-
is the reproductive.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. We'll go. I'm sorry. Not counterplan. I meant to say. We'll just leave it as disad.
Okay, so T innovation counterplan repro.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Give me a sec. This is not sending. Is everyone ready? I just sent it out, so.
I got it.
Alright, I'm going to start off with a global overview on case as well. So, is everyone ready? The F solves for extinction, combats structural violence, as well as stabilizing healthcare. Status quo healthcare is collapsing. Now we have to transfer to ACOs, insurance companies, and healthcare organizations agree and are willing. We require federal support. That's our bread and meat buckets and figured evidence. Preventing healthcare collapse is an independent impact and reason to vote out. Fee for service provides the wrong incentives and rewarding doctors for practicing defensive medicine by paying them out for tests as opposed to the health of their patients. Our Masonic evidence talks about why this necessarily increases the risk of antibiotic pathogens, i.e. that doctors overprescribe antibiotics because they are rewarded for it. That causes extinction. Davy said school continues. We will move past the post-antibiotic era that humans would not survive. And current health disparities in healthcare represent an anti-vitamin superstructure. That's our pharma et al. 06 are not addressing disparities will only worsen structural violence committed against bodies of color. That's our Quesada 11 evidence. Our Janowski 13 evidence talks about ACOs shift to population incentives means that they have the freedom of part with community-based organizations to address the biosocial determinants of healthcare that lead to disparities. Our Hitchens 7, Nixon 11, and Green 03 evidence talks about structural violence comparatively outweighs nuclear war and addressing structural violence. They should always be first priority since it affects our underemphasized in the school. Udisky 08 says that probability comes first and weighing impacts, which was grossly mishandled by the NEG. And going on to the line by line. So they're basically all their first three parts, like numeral 11, ACOs failed. This doesn't assume our Bacchus et al. 16 evidence, which is based on the Vermont all-payer ACOs, which are totally different and have been proven to work. That's what we base our solvency off. Things like media hype, ACA is stable. These things don't really apply. We're talking about how it's not the ACA, but in general, it's the insurance market in general is failing because of this fee-for-service model. right? Basically, charging per test is unsustainable. That's our Brendan Lee 11 evidence, and this is what we shift away from. So this evidence just this evidence proves why the current healthcare market is unsustainable, especially the ACA. And they say like no antibiotic resistance leads to extinction. That is completely not true. If people can't get drugs that actually prevent them from being susceptible to these antibiotics, to these bacteria, then they can't actually prevent it, and that causes mass extinction. That's Davies 08. And also, even if you don't buy the extinction impact on disease, this supercharges our structural violence advantage of our health disparities because people will still not have access, and doctors without the app will not understand the biosocial forces that prevent people from getting access. And that's also answers to new drugs. New drugs won't matter if doctors keep overprescribing it. And so there's Shapiro 17. They're saying things like how just increasing access doesn't lead to better health. No, we're not. It's not just a question of access. Our second advantage, our Caseta 11 and our Pharma 06 card literally talks about how our app, what it does is that it addresses the biosocial determinants of health. So it's not just going to be something that's just like we provide better coverage. It's also going to do something like to address not just the causes, like when we see the symptoms of the diseases, but doctors and providers can actually go into these communities, partner with ACCs, which is the Accountable Care Communities, Janowski 13, and actually help out and solve, like, is it like something that's external to health that's causing these problems. Going on to THI. We establish a national program mechanism through which insurance is provided for all citizens as a Bacchus evidence, and our interpretation for establishing national health insurance is that USGD has to put NHI into existence, not that it literally has to be entity paying doctors and hospitals. District Outcome 16. Establish, define, institute, bill, or bring into being on a firm, stable basis. And national health insurance is insurance by any entity that covers the population against illness. Encyclopedia 09. National health insurance provides coverage for all of the populations. The costs associated with illness, various types of national health insurance systems differ, and all other interpretations are limiting coverage will always inevitably be provided through states for private insurers, forcing the app to defend the USFG as a sole mechanism through which insurance is provided, limits the topic to on AF the whole year, avoids nuanced discussions about how insurance realistically interact with the government, default to reasonability, competing interpretation incentivizes, race to the bottom, no ground laws, they literally tried to run 5 off, and we have specified where our solvency evidence, that's our Bacchus 09, Pickard 09, Bacchus 16, Pickard 09, and Brendan Lee 11 evidence. They literally have no, we have not violated, and we don't fiat 50 states. We fiat that the national government establishes a national health insurance through ACOs. That's by providing block grants to the states. We don't fiat that the states accept it. We fiat that the USFG makes the states accept it. Going on to their next law, the pharma innovation. No link, all their evidence assumes ACOs from 2013. We are the model ACOs from 2016, like we said. And turn risk sharing and accountable care incentivized biomedical innovation better than school by radically changing the structure of payment models and care deliveries to 14. Accountable care is bringing all the parts of the health system into a carefully integrated delivery process focused on outcomes that change the accountable care business model will be the largest large-scale health system innovations in submitted care will also drive some remarkable innovations. The way we deliver healthcare is the 19th century model. As long as the test or procedures done and payment follows, we will be in the accountable care model, we will be moving from paying for volume for paying for value. Doctors will be accountable for health and well-being as well as healthcare costs of the population. So our business model change of this magnitude is highly disruptive. This creates huge opportunities for innovation. Healthcare will force us to do a complete 180-degree turn. And I think a great deal of innovation will come from that level of disruption and volatility. It's about changing the way you think about delivery to provide valuable care, and doctors and hospitals have to gradually change their approach. And this has non-unique R&D spending, investment capital down, regs, FDA, talent shortage, plus US not key, Alice 14. Growth of R&D spending in the U.S. averaged down for an average of 6% over the previous 15 years in the same 15-year period. Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, South Korea, India, and EU saw faster R&D spending growth. China's grew at 22% per year. The recent slowdown in R&D, new tax and regulations under Obamacare. Small and large U.S. healthcare tech companies are moving R&D centers and jobs overseas. Bureaucrats of the FDA are also hindering medical technology and drug development. The gap between innovation leaders and emerging economies is rapidly narrowing. Since 2010, private equity investment in U.S. healthcare has also diminished. Capital investment has decreased. Many of the Bryson Brothers who come to the U.S. to study subjects that are crucial to innovation are choosing to return to their home countries. And DevMedTurn, fee-for-service model of healthcare is unsustainable only by shifting incentives and can curb the effects of defensive medicine, provide effective care better and so on. The 2020 healthcare will consume a 19.8% GDP that Americans are now receiving recommended care experts, pointing to the outdated fee-for-service model for paying care as a culprit, and turn ACOs increase revenue. That's Brandon Lee 11 for the 1AC. Go on to the waivers count plan. 1. States don't have the means to fund ACOs on their own. AF provides block grants to states via federal subsidies and establish their own ACOs, meaning the counterplan can't solve on its own. PERM, use the AF as a vehicle for the counterplan. 3. PERM, do the plan and the counterplan. The federal state governments have always partnered on healthcare because they do both because of both the size of the undertaking and the economics of the marketplace. And PERM do both. They literally have no evidence about why their waiver section of the counterplan is competitive. There's no net benefit to this counterplan. They have not at all explained it. They just said it solves. Well, guess what? The AF solves too, which is why you would always prefer the affirmative, because we get access. And no solvency. They can place state control as state-only action. None of their evidence assumes that the states have the capacity or finances to act alone to address the healthcare needs of the populace without Medicaid, Medicare, and dozens of other supplements. And they don't explain at all. How this counterplan solves. For our health disparities impact, which is the biggest impact in the round. Like, they didn't contest at all our Nixon 11 evidence that says that there's a slow violence that goes on, and any time that they run this like extinction, that it kind of anytime that we don't address it, like our Green 03 card, we kind of have this problematic thing where we'll never actually get to it, and that's why you have to prefer the app. They haven't provided any solvency on why this counterplan solves for the health disparities. They just said that it just increases access, but that's not the plan. The plan is not just increasing access, it's the ability of the plan to address the biosocial determinants of health. And the only part of this counterplan that's competitive is the ACOs portion, which is what we already do. But as we said, right, you need the federal government to give the states actual funding. That's our Picket 09 card that says that federal subsidies are key. Going on to the single payer, to the disad about the patriarchy. We don't like, no link. First of all, we're not a single payer system. We literally are ACOs. Like, their cards have absolutely no link. 2, there's no uniqueness to this. Like, we don't we don't increase or decrease like reproductive rights. We don't increase reproductive rights. And 3, their impacts is at best like just probabilistic. They don't have any access to this impact. 1, because they literally, it just says patriarchy leads to war. Other than that, actually you said like even if you somehow buy some sort of link in this disad, our structural violence still outweighs health disparities. And because we actually solve for it, right? We have this that we start addressing the biosocial determinants of health, and there's a unique turn to this, which is we actually help these people who need care the most actually get care, and that dismantles a lot of the structures that exist. I stand ready for cross-ex.
Okay. I guess on the reproductive VA, you said even if we link, our structural violence outweighs. Why should we prioritize violence against certain groups over others?
Because historically they've always been ignored. That's our Nixon 11 card, right? That
what authority are you acting on to say which groups should be cared for and which shouldn't?
We're saying that all groups need to be cared for.
That's
but
exactly the opposite, actually. You said if we solve our structural violence problems, like, who cares about the other ones?
We solve our boundary. No, that's not what we said. We're saying, like, the structural disparities in healthcare, right? That's what we're saying we're solved for. I didn't mean to say, like,
but if that hurts the patriarchy,
that, like, we're solving for, like...
If that makes the patriarchy worse, it just doesn't matter.
What?
So you said, so you have a racial disparities structural violence advantage. We ran a gender disparities structural violence DA.
We're saying
and
that
how you articulated it was that if we solve for racial structural violence, gender structural violence doesn't matter. Would you like to re-articulate that now?
Yes. So I think what you were conflating is that we
that's
solve.
the way to put it.
We solve for health disparities, right, in healthcare, right? And what accountable care organizations can do is they can come into these communities,
okay,
and then they can start to assess,
fine.
right? Are the women in these getting the
I got more
care that
questions
they
if
need,
you don't
right?
mind. Your T interpretation is you meet because you are a national program and MEC for insurance for all citizens. ACOs is just a payment scheme. How are you
It's not a
how are
payment scheme. We literally create accountable care organizations, right? It's not. We change, in fact, many things. One, we change the mechanism, we change the delivery of care, and we even change the way that people get insured. And ACOs
That's
can
fine.
provide their own
Your
form of
interpretation
insurance that
is
they can use
establishing
at
NHIs that the USFG has to put NHI into existence. ACOs already exist in the SQO. How are you putting ACOs?
ACOs exist in the school, but they're not nationalized. So what our plan
Okay,
does
but
is that
see,
we
the thing
actually
is,
establish a national system of ACOs.
you say you
right?
base your plan off of this Vermont model that obviously already exists. That exists. Making it bigger is not establishing is not bringing something new into existence. How do you meet your own definition?
Right. To institute, build, or bring into being on a firm or stable basis.
It's
right?
already okay. And you said national health insurance is insurance by an entity that covers a population against illness. What entity and what illness?
The entity is the country's population, right, against illness.
How is that not incredibly vague? And how does that not open up anything?
Well, we're saying that your interpretation is super limiting, right? Coverage will always inevitably be provided through the states and private insurers, right? So this kind of forces the act to defend the USG as a sole mechanism, right? Which we find.
Which is the resolution, but I guess that's fine. Yep, starting now.
sent it. Let me know when you get it. It's going to be counterplan, and then reproductive rights, and then case in the order of disease, and then health disparities. You need a Tylenol?
No. What was it? Counterplan, reproductive rate, disease disparity.
Yes. Sorry, could you? Yeah, counterplan, reproductive rights, disease, disparities. All good? Alright, could I grab your sign? Awesome, thank you. Alright, everybody ready? You good? Alright. First on the counterplan, we're going to concede the perms as a test of competition. They have no theory arguments and no offense on this flow, so we're going to kick out of that. Moving on to reproductive rights. First of all, you should definitely earn neg on this DA because they read literally no evidence on it. So you should prefer our arguments because they're backed up by credible authors. And first, they said no link because they're not single payer, but they completely missed the point of this link. It doesn't matter whether they're all payer or whether they're single payer. They're a federally funded program. Under the Hyde Amendment, federal funding cannot go to abortion services. Right now, women have access to them through private insurance. If the federal government takes over that, that means that they no longer have that access because, I'm going to read this card now, Hyde means the plan legally can't fund abortions and it can't be repealed. Salganikoff, 1016. Congress enacted the Hyde Amendment blocks federal funds from abortion reviewed annually by any change would require approval by Congress. Unlikely given its composition, states can choose to pay for abortions under Medicaid. In other instances, Illinois enacted in September state employee insurance covers to abortion. Without coverage, women must pay out of pocket. So the plan literally forces women, the women in the low-income communities that they claim to solve for, to pay for these out of pocket, and they can't afford that. Just like they wouldn't be able to afford birth control, which was another part of the DA that went completely conceded, because look at the administration we have. There is no way they're going to cover birth control under this federal plan, which means that the communities that they claim to solve for are the ones that are impacted the most by this, which means you have a lot of coat hanger abortions that end up killing a lot of women or severely wounding them for life, or you have a lot of children that they can't afford to raise. And then they said no uniqueness because they don't increase or decrease reproductive rights. Well, first of all, we've proven that they do decrease access to reproductive rights because legally they have to, or they're not a federal plan. And that's not what uniqueness is. Uniqueness is the fact that women have access right now, and the fact that the plan hurts that. Next, they said probabilistic impacts. And so, like, you shouldn't weigh them or something. But that was a really incoherent response to our impacts. So you really shouldn't weigh that at all. But let me extend the Warren and Katie 94 evidence that patriarchy normalizes violence through the mindset of this domination mindset of men over women, and that spills over into environmental destruction because it commodifies things like women, it commodifies things like the environment, and it leads to this testosterone-fueled patriarchy that increases things like prolif and war. I mean, war is basically a giant pissing contest as a result of patriarchy. And our card specifically cites that this presumption of war mindset is the natural, righteous, and ordinary way to impose dominion. And that idea, that mindset of domination is inherent in patriarchy, and that's in our card. And so that furthers structural violence against all groups. And then they said, turn, we help those who need care, and that dismantles the structures. But they legally can't avoid this DA, which means that they cannot help these women in low-income communities. You know who gets statistically the most abortions? Women of color, poor women who can't afford birth control or things like that. Those are the people who get abortions most often, and those are the people that are going to be hurt by this plan, which means that they can't solve for this. Next, they re-articulated it, but I just kind of point out that it's kind of messed up. They decided to say that, well, as long as we solve for racial disparities, it doesn't matter, right? And this is exactly the kind of problem that we point out with their tautological framework, right? It always prioritizes one group of people over another. And that's why we said that util, which will be extended on the case debate more, needs to take precedence over this framework of probability over magnitude, because their framework specifically prioritizes caring for one group and the structural violence against one group over another. And util is the only coherent rubric that you can use that is unbiased to evaluate harms. And then in cross-text, he decided to say that I was conflating this, which is probably an example of patriarchy in round, but I guess that doesn't really matter. And moving on to disease. First, they said that they prevent collapse. That's an independent reason. But as I'll extend later, the ACA is stable right now, so there's really no collapse coming, which means that they don't get that impact. They don't solve for that. And they said that this ACA stable evidence, which is our DEMCO evidence, doesn't apply because they're talking about the market and not the ACA. But if you actually look within that evidence, it says it is talking about the market and how the market is stabilizing and how it is set to have the best year on record next year, which means, or insurers are. So the response to that was functionally conceded, which means that you have to hold true in the environment of this round that the ACA is stable now, which means, first of all, there's no point to the plan, and second of all, they don't get this independent impact that they said earlier. Next, they said they sort of double-turned themselves on here. In response to our ABR impact defense, they said that we need more drugs. But first, gut check. What are ABRs? What causes ABRs? The fact that drugs are overprescribed. So adding more drugs to that is probably not the solution. But anyway, even if you give them that more drugs solve for ABRs, you can't get that. Or anyway, yeah. We still get that you can't get that without innovation, which they would still deck. And they said that it doesn't matter, that new drugs don't matter because doctors will overprescribe them. Do you see the double turn now where they say we need new drugs, but then new drugs are bad because doctors will overprescribe them? But you can extend that new drugs don't do that. And extend that intervening actors solve the ABR extinction impact, and that's something that's an independent piece of impactee that wasn't really addressed. And consensus of studies proves that the ACA actually expands coverage, which is another solvency deficit or inherency deficit. That means the plan's not really necessary. And recent studies disprove their internal link. Katebi 17, while Obamacare expands access, it's provided little to no actual health benefits. The authors analyzed data after 2 years. The authors observed almost zero overall improvement in health. Other studies have come to similar conclusions. Health spending doesn't guarantee good health. Statisticians estimate medical care only determines around 11% of one's health. So you can, yeah. And extend that ACOs actually fail. Actually, I think I did that. Oh, yeah. Because of vague commitments and vague guidelines and the fact that they fail to address the underlying issues that affect costs and pricing controls, which means that that fee-for-service structure remains in place, and that creates an unfair competitive advantage for certain groups over others, which means that they don't actually solve for anything. Moving on to disparities. First, increasing access doesn't solve due to issues with care delivery. They say they increase so extend that because they don't actually they don't overcome this obstacle of care delivery to patients, that means that they can't solve. And increased health insurance doesn't lead to better health because you still have to get people to the doctor. People still have to be willing to go to the doctor, and people just aren't. And that's an independent reason or solvency deficit. And extend that ethical obligations are tautological. The only coherent rubric is to maximize lives, because otherwise you get caught in this cyclical logic of tautology and nothing ever gets done, and you end up valuing one group of people over another, and you get stuck in the weeds of like what which group's suffering is more, and it turns into a suffering Olympics, and that's just not okay. And extend that magnitude actually outweighs probability, and the affirmative suffers from bias because their cognitive bias actually impedes their efforts at thinking about these impacts cohesively. because they want to avoid thinking about about existential risk because it's scary and nobody wants to believe that it would actually happen.
They base it on experience, and they're like, if it hasn't happened, it won't happen.
Yeah, and they base it on experience. So they're like, oh, well, it's never happened in the past, so I don't believe it'll ever happen. But no one believed nuclear bombs were going to be invented, and then we dropped one on Hiroshima. So that's the thing. And coverage gaps are inevitable. Becker 14. Patients avoid seeing a doctor because they fear being diagnosed. One challenge is lack of understanding about insurance. Hispanic and African American communities sees a psychological barrier because of fear they won't see a doctor. That's time.
Okay, so onto the patriarchy dissent.
Yeah,
Is that
sure.
what we call it? Alright.
I mean, reproductive rights.
Reproductive
but,
rights.
I mean, whatever you want to call it. Patriarchy's the impact, I guess. Patriarchy root cause.
Okay, so onto that dissent. So you're saying that the link is that any federally funded Medicare program would
Not just
trigger.
specific to Medicaid. We're saying any plan that prioritizes federal funding over private insurance or state funding.
So why hasn't Obamacare triggered it yet?
Because Obamacare is not an all-payer system that would necessitate federal funding for all health care, which is what all-payer
Where
is.
in your card does it say all payer? I'm still confused because it literally says single payer throughout. the
Okay,
document.
so again, you're missing the point, right? So this is not just about single payer. It's not just about all payer. It's not just about public option, right? The mechanism is immaterial. What I'm saying is that federal funding legally cannot go to abortion funding, which means that if the plan is funded by the federal government, it still triggers the link. You need to look at the warrant of the card and not just the tagline, see single payer, and go, oh, we don't link, because that's not how this works.
But this is just a link of omission, right? Because if anything,
No,
if
it's not
just,
a link of omission. Look at, okay, hold up. The Hyde Amendment prohibits federal funding of abortions. This is troubling. Would prohibit sale of private
You
insurance
literally read
that
over the single
duplicates
payer part.
and the like. Yeah, I'm aware because it doesn't matter. Would prohibit sale of private insurance that companies stick around to sell abortion insurance is slim. The Hyde Amendment's mesh with single payer or
How would an
federal.
all payer system, right, linked then? If it's if your card specifically talks about single payer and all payer is not single payer.
Do you
right?
know what the Hyde
so
Amendment
the
is?
Federal,
Do you understand
I
what the Hyde
understand what
Amendment
the Hyde
is?
Amendment is. It's predictable.
Wonderful. So that is the link.
So just because the Hyde Amendment exists, we link.
The Hyde
So her
Amendment
only link is that the Hyde
prohibits
Amendment
federal
exists.
funding of any kind from funding abortions, which means if you utilize federal funding, if you are a federally funded program, you trigger this link. Does
Okay.
that make sense? Or should I slow down a little bit for you?
All right, going on. So how? Wait, no. Actually, yeah. Keep going. Talk about that.
Wonderful.
So, exactly, how does,
the evidence that I read in the 2NC
so
under
how
this
do women? So do
means
women have
that-
reproductive
hold,
choice?
Hang
now?
on. Hold up.
Wait. Let me
Hold
just
up.
ask this question.
No, look at the evidence that I read in the 2NC. Hyde means the plan legally can't fund abortions. That is not specific to single payer. I love how you conveniently missed that piece of evidence. But it
But like,
actually
you still have
says
not said why ACOs link. So
why
you still
it's
haven't-
because they are a federally funded program. Are you not a federally funded program? Please say
If
yes.
your
so
only
we can
link
all
is to
see.
federally funded programs, I mean, there's like a billion in the healthcare industry alone. How come they don't all link or trigger this?
Because right now women have access through private insurance and state funded programs.
Okay, we don't get rid of private insurance, so
You don't get rid of private insurance.
no.
That's a shift from the 1AC, but sure, let's go with that. Here you go.
Ready for the 1 hour?
Taking like 2 seconds, bro.
3, 2, 1.
stop around 2:45. Okay. Let me send that out. Okay, talk us in. It's going to be innovation and then T.
Alright, so on innovation, you can see there's no link, like all their evidence assumes ACOs, that's not us, fine. But there's no link term. They said we can't, the link term can't overcome delivery issues, such as like transportation. Like people simply aren't able to get access, like physically like go to the doctors right now, and innovation does nothing to solve that, and ACOs also doesn't do anything. And also concede that the DA is non-unique, so there's no risk of offense. And even if you do think there's a risk of offense, T outweighs because T is a procedural. On to T. New violation should equals mandatory. Their solvency evidence said that they are basing their plan off of is not mandatory. Their Backus evidence says one of the most important components of all-payer ACO model is participation as ACO is voluntary. Violation: the act should be mandatory action. Plan is voluntary, which kills and eggs ground DA links, and also limits, since the act could choose any healthcare action and any amount of people do it could still be topical, which is obviously impossible to prepare against as the negative. NHI must compel participation by all residents through legal stipulation. Allowing the choice to choose coverage is voluntary, which is distinct. Tab A4. Classification of insurance into mandatory voluntary is proposed. Mandatory insurance includes schemes of participation compulsory to government through legal stipulation. When mandated insurance coverage, all residents coverage scheme can be referred to as national health insurance. Voluntary insurance includes insurance is what insurees participate on a voluntary basis, or employers can choose themselves. So they are simply not national health insurance because they are voluntary, which is a distinct thing. That was what our evidence said, and and specifically in regards to ACO, not much lit even exists. The idea of an ACO is only 10 years old by itself. The first ever all-payer ACO model was established this January. It also definitely doesn't substitute insurance or provide universal coverage. That's much more 16. In January, Vermont became the first state to move voluntary all-payer ACO model. Historic in terms of scope, the state aims to have 70% of insured residents covered by ACO in 2020 and 2022. And you should mark this evidence on your flow. This card assumes their model and concedes that they aren't voluntary. Don't allow new 1AR spin or 2AR spin to change how their plan functions. Hold them to what they defend as their solvency mech, and hold them to the method that they defend. This much more evidence is very important because it specifically it says how Vermont's all ACO model is voluntary, so they definitely are not mandatory. And in regards to AF ground, there's plenty of AF ground under our insert. Multiple types of insurance with differing impacts. Allowing non-mandatory schemes, ruin stable link, and CP ground span 12. Various types of insurance are available. National health insurance based on mandatory enrollment. Voluntary mechanisms include private health insurance. Community vary. Types have different impacts. Populations, PHI serve main affluent segments of a CHI can benefit the poor. Their impact varies. Okay, on to the, I guess, interp overview. National health insurance has historically meant a healthcare system that's universal, comprehensive, exclusively government financed, completely replaces alternative financiers. Our interpretation is based on the historical deployment of the term, so it's preferable to cherry-pick definitions that's Rhode Island and Vermont, and only our interp can solve our standards. Interpretations are not based on long-term understanding of what NHI means. It's arbitrary because it's one author detailing what it is instead of analysis of how the word is used. Also, it also means the counter-interp can't solve the standards because it's not based on any predictable understanding of the resolution. National health insurance in a massive debate in and of itself with tons of different proposals proposals and how it's financed or administered, and we can only get to in-depth application by forcing the app to defend it. And they should have to specify what form of value-based care they defend. That includes capitation, all payer rate setting, bundle payments, goal budgeting, independent reason to vote negative because it obfuscates debates about those funding mechanisms and prevents the negative from being able to read funding picks, which are the most dynamic negative strategies on this topic. And extend our violation that that ACOs are providers and not insurers, and create a provider network is not a funding payment scheme for people in the U.S. That was our CMS 17 evidence. It specifically says how it defines ACOs as a group of doctors, hospitals, and other providers who come together to give care to patients. They have provided no definition or evidence as to what ACOs are. The NEG is the only one offering a definition as to what ACO means, which means you should default to our interp because they're definitely not insurers. On to the limits debate. Limits infinite number combination of hybrid schemes makes it impossible to be negative. National health insurance is the only mechanism limiter on the topic, so having a limited understanding is key. Our interpretation is key to predictable interest, outlays, and turn their offense. First is depth over breadth education. A more limited topic fosters deeper discussion about the app, which means we become better advocates and more knowledgeable national health insurance in the U.S. And second is clash. A more focused topic results in more clash, making sure the NEG has good arguments in the 1AC. Education is gained by just reading the 1AC but testing it for flaws. And third is focused research. Focused research results in better arguments, gets to the core of the literature we set out to discuss. And you should err neg towards over-limiting. There aren't any other mechanisms on the topic, which means eliminating through the topic through this word is key. It's best for app creativity because it forces the app to think critically of how to get to certain lid bases. They said we over-limit, but I have that somewhere, I think. Maybe I don't. All right, whatever. On the ground for now. Ground explicitly the app explicitly steals three core neg positions: states, all payer, and ACO CPs. Being comprehensive and universal guarantees linked to topic DAs like farmer recruitment and econ. The fact that they spiked out of the innovation DA, which is the with our generic link, which is the most generic of generic topic DAs, just proves that they have stolen neg ground and use it to their own advantage. Our interpretation solves neg ground, which outweighs and turns off offense. Core neg ground depends on a massive shift in advantages of the private sector insurance market. The app not defending full government finance healthcare steals every DA based off that and hijacks core neg arguments like the market CPA innovation DA. Forces teams into generics like states and politics, return education offense, and guarantee stale debates.
And they're also trying to spike out of reproductive
And they also tried to spike out of reproductive rights,
by saying they don't make private insurance illegal, which means
by not making private insurance illegal, which is just more proof on the vagueness and their shiftiness, which means you should err neg. And you should evaluate T according to competing interpretations. Reasonability is arbitrary and requires innovation. They didn't have any reason to refer reasonability or even why competing interps is bad. So you should use competing interps as a way to frame how you view debate. The limitations we have, we don't over limit. We allow plenty of app creativity, and the fact that they kill fairness in education in this round through the expanding limits and killing neg ground, and that's going to outweigh our evidence. Interps outweigh.
We have 7:30, right? Do you have stuff on this end?
Yes.
We'll go here.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I'm done for prep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, 4:30.
Good.
I'm gonna go for. I'll wait till she comes.
Like we need to come back.
We just have one definition. Should we just wait? You don't have any other cards, right?
No.
Alright, I'll just send it out. Do you mind if it's in the body of the email?
That's totally fine.
It's just one inter.
It's no big deal.
A lot easier than sending out a whole new doc.
Yeah. No. I just wasted a lot of time. If you feel like I missed something.
Whoa. That implies something.
Well, no, I mean like so then you don't have to go back for it. No, I'm not saying you're gonna miss something. I'm just saying that you don't want to just this and this, and then we might have stuff that
Yeah, I have that.
You have new cards?
No. Oh yeah.
it's just a counter curve. So we sent it out in the email.
Okay.
No, okay, I will text. I'm gonna go in the order of case and the disease, in order of disease and then disparities. Oh wait, I'm gonna give an overview and then I'm gonna go for the app in the order of disease and disparities. Then I'm going to go on the reproduction disad, and then I'm gonna go for the T violations.
Ready whenever you are.
So first, for the case overview. The current health system is centered around doctors, hospitals, and insurance companies, but not the patients themselves. The ACO will align provider and patient incentives through a value-based reimbursement system and will bring about better health outcome. Our app leads to accountable care communities, which focus on community-based prevention. We have presented a specific plan which combats anti-blackness and slow violence, which is being ignored in the real world and has been conceded throughout this entire round. Then, these threats both exist in the status quo, and we have to address them both. They have not addressed anything on the case flow adequately, which means that they concede to both our advantages and our structural disparity they act as and both our advantages act as an independent reason to vote app. Firstly, they did very, very little work on our case. Their only argument on the markets is that markets somehow stabilize. However, we're not somehow markets are able to stabilize, but we say that what we're getting rid of govern our system is not, we're not critiquing the current situation, whether it's how the status of the market. We're critiquing the system that has been in place since 1999 from our Goldman-Lipton card that has been criticized for 18 years, which is the fee-for-service system. This is itself is bad. We're not talking about the current scenario of the current status of the market. And secondly, addressing their bind. We're not stuck in a bind because we're saying that innovation is good and bio-innovation is good. We stand by that. However, we're saying what is bad is that the doctors are over-prescribing too much medicine. The medicines can be there, but the doctors can't just give people medicine because they don't want to get in trouble. We are changing that because we get rid of the practice of defensive medicine by focusing on overall outcomes. And finally, they have made multiple arguments on how fee-for-service is still in place, how we don't solve for patient-doctor problems, or how we don't have care delivery. However, one, they kept the 17 card refers to the ACA, and two, the main goal of ACOs is to change the current system of the fee-for-service and defensive medicine, and ACOs do exactly that. We move towards a value-based reimbursement system, which changes that very equation, and we stand by that magnitude outweighs probability, and we have both that in our advantages. So moving on to the and structural violence outweighs because we're currently ignoring the people who are being oppressed by focusing on only those big spectacle things. So moving on to the moving on to the reproductive services DSAD. So one, no link. Their Chakrabarti 16 card is specific to single payer. It's literally, the word single payer is literally mentioned 3 times, which is every single sentence that they have mentioned in their evidence. They have evidence on how they argue that Hyde Amendment works with single payer. They do not allow them to link it to ACOs unless they are able to prove otherwise. They say that there is no federal fund for abortions. However, we have federal health insurance now, and they'll still have a post-plan. They'll still have the birth control post-plan because we don't get rid of existing insurance, public or private. And if anything, ACOs increase reproductive choice for women. It looks at the population as a whole, which means that minorities or those hurt by the status quo, which in this case is this patriarchy, receive the assistance they require. Under the plan, women are able to fight against the patriarchy, which means that the DSAD has no impact, and this literally turns their entire DSAD. And now onto topicality. One, we present a plan that nationalizes ACOs, which means that participation is mandatory. They don't realize how we have a plan text that makes it involuntary. And two, counter-interpretation. Should means odd. Should, must, odd. You should use to indicate duty, propriety, or expediency. And 3, we meet the interpret. F includes a blanket endorsement of the plan. And 4, standards. A, common usage should denote an obligation under common usage key to predictability and fairness. And B, clash. Counter-interpretation leads to better clash since we have to debate the merits of the proposed plans rather than the plan which will realistically clash or not clash to education. And C, you should default to reasonability. Competing interpretation is a race to the bottom. Plus, a new flow in the 1ANR. Massive time skew and incredibly abusive hours. We get no new constructives after the block. Still, no impact stories you should find persuasive. First for education, we offer the best education. We talk about a form of national health insurance that is more accessible and actually teaches something that is not single payer. And ground, they literally ran 5 off. They don't get specific ground. And precision, we held out solvency, evidence, all payer funding is held at all 16. And we did provide definitions, and we're not vague. And no topical version of the act. We still have no idea what is topical under their interpretation. And we establish a national program and mechanism through which insurance is provided for all citizens. That's our Becker's evidence. And extend our counter interpretation. Our interpretation for establishing national health insurance is that the USFG has to put into existence, not that it literally has to be the entity paying doctors and hospitals, and to establish to found institutional build or to bring into from being on stable basis, and extend our counter interpretation. National health insurance is issue insurance by any entity that covers a population against illness. No reason that our interpretation is bad. All other interpretations are over limiting coverage will always be inevitably be provided to states and patient private insurance forcing the act to defend the USFG as the sole mechanism through which insurance is provided, limits the topic to 1 act for the whole year, and avoids nuanced discussions about how insurance realistically interact with the government. Default to reasonability. Competing interpretation incentivizes a race to the bottom, and that distracts from substantive education. And finally, They don't have a topical version of the affirmative, which is why they should lure us onto immediately. They're essentially excluding our topic, discussion of minorities that are already ignored in the status quo from the conversation, which by itself is problematic and is an impact to the T. So they dropped all that out and clicked Green 03 and Nixon 11 evidence.
245.
I'm gonna go on the reproductive rights DA, and then touch on case, and then T. Can I see your skin?
Reproductive.
Thank you.
Doesn't even make sense.
Alright. Everybody ready? Cool. First on the reproductive rights DA will concede no link, but just note the shift they made about how they don't make private insurance illegal. This is a link to T because that was not clearly articulated. It wasn't in the plan text. It wasn't even really highlighted in the 1AC. This is not clearly articulated until the cross-X of the 2NC, and then blown up in the 1AR, which just furthers and supercharges all of our T arguments about vagueness. And then on case real quick, they've totally conceded this inherency argument about how the ACA is stable, so even if you don't give us the T arguments, the market is stabilizing now, and they totally dropped the fact that the ACA expands coverage so that solves case, and then they specifically said in their 1AR that the goal of the ACA was to solve the impacts of the case, and they've given no reason as to why it doesn't, which is a huge solvency takeout. You can cross-apply that to the disparities flow, but we're mostly going to go for T. First on... on this new violation, the solvency evidence that they said are basing their plan off of is not mandatory. That's their BACS evidence, and they said they're mandatory since they're nationalized, but that makes no sense. Their own model says that they're voluntary. Like, their own solvency evidence specifically says they're voluntary. The plan text says nothing about changing this, so you can't buy into that new skew. And violation, the act should be a mandatory action. The plan is voluntary, which kills neg ability. Two impacts versus ground links are predicated off of large changes as a result of USFG shift from the SQO, allowing voluntary apps spikes any ability to access DAs like Pharma or Econ, since changes could theoretically just be minuscule, kills any ability for the neg to have a fair debate, and limits since the app could choose any healthcare action and any amount of people to do it and still be topical, and extend our definition to NHI must compel participation by all residents through legal stipulation, allowing the choice to choose coverage is voluntary, which is distinct, and you should prefer ours because it is contextual to healthcare, and it is actually written by experts in the field. Theirs is one line from dictionary.com. It's not contextual to this debate, and not much even exists. The idea of an ACO is only 10 years old by itself. The first ever all-payer ACO model was established this January. It also definitely doesn't substitute insurance or provide universal coverage at all. And we told you to mark that up on your flow. Do it again. The card assumes their model and concedes that they aren't voluntary. You shouldn't allow any 2AR spin to change how their plan functions. Hold them to what they defend as their solvency mech. And they conceded that AFGround isn't hurt under the neg interp. There's plenty of AFGround under our interp, multiple types of insurance with differing impacts, allowing non-mandatory schemes, ruin stable link to CP ground. And they said that on the counterinterpretation, prefer ours because ours is in the context of both the topic and the resolution. Their definition is literally you ought to do things. That makes anything under T, anything T under their interp, since every NHI is something you ought to do. And voluntary and mandatory are distinct in the context of NHI. They mandatory is NHI, voluntary is not. And our evidence specific to their plan concedes that ACOs are voluntary since they aren't mandatory. They link to our T violation. And they said that it was a time skew, and so you shouldn't weigh this T violation, but no time skew because of this new T violation. It's the block. We're allowed to introduce new arguments, and even so, new abuse justifies new arguments. The 2AC shift justifies this new violation. That vagueness.
You should also extend just the ACO evidence.
Yeah, extend our ACO evidence that they're providers and not insurers, and creating a provider network is obviously not funding payment schemes for people in the U.S. That's not. They provided no definition for what ACOs are. The neg is only offering a definition, which means that you have to default to our interpretation, and I think I've got it from here.
Here, just read this.
Hang on, I've got it. On the TVA was answered on our precision argument. NHI and single payer are used synonymously, and our Bodenheimer evidence specifies what a TVA would consist of, so they can't say that we didn't give them a TVA. We gave them all the tools to build it themselves, and said, and only our interp can solve our standards. Interpretations are not based on a long-term understanding of what NHI means as arbitrary, because it's just one author detailing what it is instead of an analysis of how the word is used. It also means the counter-interp can't solve their standards because it's not based on any predictable understanding of the resolution. National health insurance is a massive debate in and of itself, with tons of different proposals on how it's financed or administered. We can only get an in-depth education via forcing the app to defend it.
The top part too, just.
And national health insurance, it has historically been a healthcare system that's universal, comprehensive, and exclusively government financed. It completely replaces the alternative financiers. Our interpretation is based on the historic deployment of the term, so it's preferable to their cherry-picked definitions. That's our Bodenheimer and Grumick evidence, and that's specifically relevant to the fact that they didn't specify that they didn't make private insurance illegal, and they should have to specify what form of value-based care they defend. That can include capitation, all-payer rate setting, bundled payments, global budgeting. All of these are TVAs, and that's an independent reason to vote negative because it obfuscates debates about those funding mechanisms. Violation. I read that ACOs are providers, not insurers, and they provided no definition. And the 1AC never clearly states their position. Yeah, so that's some more definitions. And all of our ground and limits arguments apply here. On limits, infinite number of combinations or hybrid schemes makes it impossible to be neg. National health insurance is the only mechanism limiter on the topic, so having a limited understanding of it is key, and that's why you should prefer our definitions, because that's what limits the topic. And our interpretation is key to predictable limits, which outweighs and turns their offense. First is depth over breadth of education. A more limited topic fosters deeper discussions about the app, which means we become better advocates and more knowledgeable about national health insurance in the United States. Second is clash. A more focused topic results in more clash by making sure the neg has good arguments against the 1AC. Education isn't gained by just reading of the 1AC, but by testing it for its flaws, and we have not been able to do that. Third is focused research. Focused research results in better arguments that get to the core of the literature, and you should A or neg towards over limiting. There aren't any other mech limiters to the topic, which means that limiting it here is key. That's best for AF creativity on ground. Yeah, we read 5 off, and they spiked literally all of them. And cross-apply competing interps to this. You have to evaluate T according to competing interpretations because reasonability is arbitrary and requires intervention, which you should not do for them. It's better to compare evidence.
Common knowledge is key. Contextual knowledge is better.
Yeah, they said common knowledge is key, but contextual knowledge is better. And
It's not abusive in one hour to read new T.
I already said that. And they explicitly steal. They prove this abuse through spiking out of all the links to our dis ads, so they can't say we get ground.
How much time do you have?
You have 4:30.
Okay, thank you. I think paper I need it. No. Just put it on your computer.
Can you send me a video? What do you need?
I just want to make answers for you. Where should I put them? Are you gonna read at the very bottom?
I'm gonna go on.
I'll just highlight the stuff you should read then.
I'm not gonna read the
Read the green highlights. Do you need your laptop? Okay.
going to be case in the order of disease, then health disparities, and then we're going to go on to T and NHI. Is everyone ready? Good. Judge?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Starting with our first advantage, disease. They say that the ACA does not solve, but that is that the ACA does solve, but that's completely false. What ACOs do is that they move away from population incentives. They move towards population incentives. They move away from fee-for-service, which is exactly why the ACA can't solve for this miscommunication between patients and doctors. What happens is that patients don't trust doctors because they see doctors as kind of charging doing a bunch of defensive medicine practices just because they get a lot more money from doing these kind of practices. And by moving away from fee-for-service and doing a population-based incentive, we move away from that, and that leads to less defensive medicine practices, which solves for disease, because then we don't lead to these practices that lead to antibiotic resistance that eventually leads to the extinction. They dropped all their impact defense, so even on 1% solvency, that means you air out. And they completely dropped all of the solvency and all of the defense on the health disparities flow. They're just like cross-apply ACA. But as we said before, the ACOs, what they do is they form accountable care communities, which go into these communities and start to address the biosocial determinants, the external things like figuring out why people don't go to hospitals, figuring out what are causing these external factors that are causing diseases. They don't actually, the ACA does not actually address these kind of things, these root causes of health disparities. It just treats like these patients that come in, but they don't actually treat the actual communities. And this is the biggest impact in the round, which they've conceded. They dropped Green 02 evidence and our Nixon 11 evidence, which says that our AF is key to making sure that we don't keep precluding this discussion on structural violence, on anti-blackness. And Arquiseta et al. 11 says that if we don't address this, basically that means that we even worsen structural violence because we start to view other people, by denying these people of color, minorities of color, like healthcare, we're literally denying them a fundamental right, and that only serves to make it so that they look even more so like as the other, like they don't even deserve something that's a fundamental human right. And we should, going on to T. Going on to T, we meet all of their interpretations. We present a plan that nationalizes ACOs, which means that participation is mandatory. They don't realize that the plan text makes it involuntary. When we say we nationalize it, that means that states have to participate in it. Our evidence is Bacchus et al. 11 evidence, right? That's we claim off of our plan text, we defended that, and then they should have asked us in cross-text what we meant by should. And counterterm should means ought. They didn't address why this is bad. So even if you don't buy that, we meet their interpretation, we meet our counter-interpretation, and this F includes a blanket endorsement of the plan. And they completely dropped their standards, which is this is common usage, should. And onto clash, we've faced this team, extend the 2 AC and 1 AAR answers onto clash. They said that there's no clash. However, we debated against each other multiple times before, and each time they brought against so many off cases against us. Onto their impacts round, they literally ran 4 or 5 off. They didn't explain they shouldn't get access just because they didn't get access to specific ground. All of a sudden they have no ground, and we didn't just willy-nilly spiked out of their things. They literally chose just not to go for them, and if they really wanted to go for them, they should have picked better cards and done better research. And that kind of turns their education by saying that they don't get education because they didn't have in-depth discussion. Well, that's completely false. They literally engaged us on our app. They had case answers to our app, and they don't. They're saying we don't provide universal coverage. That we're providers, not insurance. That's completely false. We establish a national program and the mechanism through which insurance is provided for all citizens. Their interpretation, their Bodenheimer and Gumersch card, literally defines NHI as single payer, which literally makes it so fund fuel supercharges our argument that they are over limiting. They don't let us talk about things like ACOs that could potentially also solve as a mechanism of NHI. They don't explain how they dropped our offense, which is our Green 02, our Nixon 11 evidence, right? Which is the plan. It's a necessary prerequisite to address these slow violence things. By dropping that and being over limiting, these are two independent disats that they have failed to address throughout the entire round. And then they're like TVA, single payer. This just feels how over limiting they are. They don't let us, like, they're literally like, if the only TVA is single payer, right, then we really don't have much ground at all, no F ground at all. And we did specify that NHI is insurance. That is our Bacchus evidence. They still have failed to read it throughout the entire ground. Other things like precision, we hold to our solvency evidence, all payer funding for Bacchus et al. 16. If they want us to be more specific, that is completely like stupid. And no vagueness, like we specify, we don't claim any advantages that don't stem from the plan text. We don't claim anything that isn't from our solvency. If they wanted more clarification, things they should have specified in cross-text. They're saying that, that because we still have private insurance, we're not national health insurance. There's absolutely no definition that says that. Like, they didn't provide any definitions that says that by having private insurance, we somehow preclude national health insurance. And extend our counter interpretation. National health insurance is something that the USRG has to put NHI into existence, not that it literally has to be the entity paying doctors and patients, which would me. And extend our other counter interpret that national health insurance is insurance by any entity that covers a population against illness. There's no reason to suggest our interpretation is bad, and we do this, that we provide coverage, we are topical, and default to reasonability, competing interpretations incentivize a race to the bottom that distracts from education.
We've ever hit your app this year. We hit your app on the warming topic, but we've never hit you on healthcare before.
I think we've been AF every time.
Yeah, we've been AF both times we've hit you.
It wasn't West Point.
We were neg.
Because y'all ran the.
Or we were AF because y'all ran the counter plan that we didn't have answers to. You ran the free markets counter plan and we couldn't find our front line. We've literally never been AF against you.
And solved the F.
Alright. I ended up voting negative in this debate. I think that there is examples of how you shift around, or at least the lack of clarity that emerges from the start of the debate. It makes it difficult for a debate to take place. And so I do look to your evidence, and the first card does say that the benefits of the ACO versus a single payer, because it's an all-payer model instead of a single payer, one of the key differences is because it's a voluntary model. And so your argument that your plan text nationalizes, like, okay, maybe it does, but your evidence that says you solve, and the way that you get out of their link arguments, because ACOs are different than everything else, is the exact shift that it indicates that it's problematic. So you're just getting out of their arguments on the case debate by saying, well, we're not that type of ACO, we're a different type of ACO, and the evidence that you say is a different type of ACO because it's a voluntary mechanism and not a mandatory mechanism, which creates a unique shift that takes place. Another example of this is like when you no-link the reproductive rights dissent. Now, I think that you're like, well, federal, it doesn't matter single or all-payer, but it does matter because all-payer does not require federal financing, which is why the all-payer system is different. However, when I go to their plan text says that they provide federal grants, which means that their plan text still has federal funding. So what you need to do in cross-text is be like, even if you're all-payer, the money that those individual companies will get are coming from federal grant money, which means that you still can't fund abortion, so the ACOs couldn't do that, even though you're not single payer. So their plan text does give you a link to that, but it is not because all payer and single payer are the same things. They're very different things. But that shift is precisely why, like, you destroy types of debates over, like, funding mechanisms, which is a specific type of ground that the negative team says is an important ground to debate about, and then link that argument so that way we can't have these funding debates, and then you're like, well, they ran all these off-case arguments, but the literal answer that you give to all of them is just a straight no-link argument. So it's like the abuse is, clearly demonstratable there. And I think that the 2-1R could do a better job of pointing to these instances of abuse where the shift happens, opposed to just being like, they've done a bunch of shifty things. Point to the actual ground that you lost in the debate, opposed to forcing me to do some of point to these instances. But it happens enough where I think the neg does enough work on that. I think that what's important for the affirmative, if you're going to run this, is explain why the ACO portion / all payer portion of the debate creates a better form of debate for what we allow. Like, the negative gives a couple of different types of single payer options that the affirmative could be, so it's not just like one single payer app. And so, like, clearly you would add more to that topic, but why is adding that more uniquely necessary if that could just be like neg ground, which is there are examples of ground that they lose. They can't run a state's counterplan. They can't run anything. That's something else I'd point to, is their permutation on your counterplan is another instance of abuse where you couldn't have gone to something because they're like, oh, we do this exact same thing because we're using the states, right? And so that destruction of ground that takes place becomes, does not lose you the round per se, but you need to then explain why that is bad ground the negative shouldn't debate. Why is the state's counterplan bad? Why is the funding pick bad? Why are those debates bad debates, and what better debates do we get instead, and give that description of that ground and things along those lines would be useful. And that all requires you to do a better job of sort of extending your counter interpretation beyond the word ought, right? So it's like there's that should component, which is sort of persuasive to me, but I think just like the initial definition that you have to be sort of single payer is more persuasive than just like should versus, mandatory versus voluntary. But I do think that is also important. But what is national health insurance needs to be better debated out, and I think that the negative team is also ahead on the fact that like your definitions are coming from like dictionaries and encyclopedias that are like it's just this, whereas theirs are coming from authors within the field with intents to define for how it's been historically used, which means it's more field contextual to how debates would actually operate in here. And so it's like that means that I think that they do give a better model what debate would look like. And then even if I don't give competing interpretations in regards to reasonability, I think that what's taking place in this debate puts you beyond that threshold of reasonability because of the strategy of how you answer things, and you just don't meet their interpretation because all your no links are predicated on the way in which you don't meet that interpretation. And so you then need to have the burden of what those other types of debates should look like in order to bounce back against that. Also, if you're going to be like over limiting, if that's going to be a core part of your strategy, you need to have a better discussion of breadth versus depth, why breadth of debate is better than depth of debate. And I think most judges and most people think that the default is in-depth debating is better than more nuance is good. That's why we have one resolution for the entirety of the year. But having creativity within that and being able to have that range of debate is important, but you need to do a better job sort of on winning me over in terms of like breadth, because I don't think that when they're like there's a bunch of different types of single payers, I don't think it's necessarily entirely over limiting, but I could be persuaded by 4 types of single payer apps is not enough. These are these unique types of debates that are important to get into. The only reason why you say we should talk about your stuff is because of racial disparity, but I'm not convinced that like ACOs is the only way we can ever talk about racial disparity, so it's not like the key ground issue that opens up new avenues of discussion and things like that. Yeah, I would also say that given how much time the 1R spends on T, in the 1AR I would move T up in your roadmap, because you end up, you don't undercover it dramatically, but the prioritization shows that like it is not as serious in your mind than it needs to be, and the 1R in my mind, the block strategy seems to be tipped to go for T over anything else, or it's either that or the reproductive rights stuff. So I'd spend your time between those two positions. And case debate is mostly defense, but you spend half your time answering that defense. So I think you could reorient your time in that regards. And again, just when kicking out arguments, like on the counterplan, point out that is the abuse on the disad, and you do that when you kick out of the, the abuse on T, you do that when you kick out of the disad. but when you go back to T, then point out and remind the judges of these instances of how these are the exact types of debates that we have lost our ground on and things like that. All right. Any questions or anything?
No, I just forgot that reproductive rights is like totally inherent towards single payer.
Well, I mean, you're right that federal funding is a link, and so if there are block grants from the federal funds, then this would link.
Yeah, I
So-
didn't know what ACOs were until 10 minutes before this round.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's probably on me, but I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to use federal funding somehow, right?
Right. I mean, so you just ask, like, do you use federal funding? And it's either yes or no, and be like, if you do, then you link. If not, then you're not
I
topical.
just wasn't thinking. I was just kind of panicking because I was like, oh no.
Right. Right.